Welcome to Follow the Medical Record, where healthcare experts give insights into the increasing importance of following a patient's medical record through the health ecosystem with compliance, privacy, security, and efficiency front and center. This podcast is brought to you by MRO and hosted by Don Hardwick, Senior Vice President of Client Relations at MRO. Don has been in the health information management industry for over 40 years and has extensive knowledge of how medical records make their way through the healthcare ecosystem. At MRO, Don is responsible for strategic client engagement programs and overall client satisfaction. To hear from all of MRO's industry experts, be sure to visit mrocorp.com for additional content and to sign up for our monthly e-newsletter. Over to you, Don.
Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Don Hardwick, and thank you for listening to Follow the Medical Record. You can learn more about me and MRO on our website at mrocorp.com. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, and be sure to follow us on Twitter at MROcorp. I'm very excited to introduce to you one of the industry leaders, Anthony Murray, in our topic today, which is cybersecurity and how to protect health information from successful cyber incidences. Anthony, welcome to the show. And for our listeners, if you could give us a little bit of your background and the position that you hold, your role at MRO.
Sure, Don. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to get the opportunity to speak to everyone. I am Anthony Murray. I am the Chief Information Officer and the Information Security Officer. I have been with MRO for 13 years in various roles. I've been the security officer since 2016, and we've seen a lot of changes to both the threat ecosystem and our approach to cybersecurity here at MRO, and I'm sure that's no different for each of you and your enterprises. I have over 20 years experience in servicing the healthcare industry, most recently, obviously, the release of information, but supporting clinical manufacturing and pharmaceuticals.
Awesome. Thanks, Anthony, for that brief background. I appreciate that. Anthony, I don't think we could have picked a better time for this topic, especially in light of what's just happened with a cyber attack on the U.S. pipeline and gas distribution supplies in the southern part of the U.S. So this topic and it is very, very timely, and in light of some of the recent past cyber incidences that have happened with doctors' offices and hospitals, I think this topic is right on target. But don't these type of security incidences occur pretty often or routinely, but are fairly unsuccessful?
Well, there's a couple things to that. One is, unfortunately, I think it's almost always going to be a timely topic. It seems like every other week or so we're seeing another attack on some sort of critical infrastructure, whether it's the healthcare industry or the oil pipeline or the nuclear power plant. There are reportedly a large number that are thwarted and don't really present any downstream effect. But what we do know is that ransomware specifically and malware, it will just continue to be a way that bad actors can find ways to apply sophisticated targeted attacks for a very specific purpose. In most of these cases that we see pop up recently, that purpose is to make money. It's so unfortunate that ransomware has become such a big business. It used to be nation states, but now there are actual, cyber crime syndicates that are buying and selling malware and ransomware strains and cobbling together technologies out on the dark web that make it, almost like the Amazon of malware, that they can go out and purchase this stuff and point it at a target and see if it hits. We also see a persistency in a lot of the attacks. So they're looking for people with either common or known exploits or they're continuing to probe a specific target over and over and over again until they find a compromise, which could be, an unpatched system, an open vulnerability in their VPN solution, or the people. We talk about phishing as one of the lead ways that malware and ransomware gets injected into an enterprise. So, according to Anon Corp, who is a global insurance broker, the total number of ransomware reports has increased by over 700% from 2019 to 2020. And the payments themselves are getting much, much higher, making almost a 60% leap in payment since the last prior year. And again, they're using the sophisticated attacks to average around $780,000 per payment. And the payments for damages and ransomware expect to be somewhere in the $200 billion mark in 2021. When we talk about where does all this money come from, well, there's an effect on our cyber insurance coverages as well. What you see is it's harder and harder to get coverage, and your rates are certainly going up depending on the type of information that you're holding and the businesses that you're representing. And then your coverage is going to go down. And then you see that having cyber insurance can actually make you more of a target because you're going to be more willing to pay. And then to further complicate it, there are now whispers that the government is going to look into your activities if you pay ransom to certain groups. So now you can actually get into the government, or get in trouble with the government if you pay ransom to a handful of organizations.
Well, Anthony, isn't that, it's almost like ransomware, it's like cyber blackmail. Doesn't that lead to additional blackmail or ransoms that are going to be demanded of that same company again by the one that they're paying the ransom to?
Don, that's a really great point. When we look, 2-3 years back, and ransomware, maybe 4 years back, and ransomware was really becoming a thing. Their whole goal was to just get access to information and to encrypt it so that you can't get access to it. And way back in the day, they would ask you to make a Bitcoin payment or whatever, because they locked up your family pictures. But obviously that's changed, and they're going after enterprises. And one of the more recent terrifying trends is they're spending more time understanding what they've got access to, and they're copying off information and as part of whatever the security incident is that you're going through, and then they're encrypting it. So they are almost double dipping. They're going to, one, ask you for a payment to have your information decrypted so that you can get your business or your service back up and running. And then they're going to try and hit you for another payment because there's the threat that they'll release whatever they were able to siphon off out into the public or sell it to somebody else and make money that way.
What happens once there's been that breach, Anthony? How can a company, without paying that, recover from an incident like that? It seems like that the only reason they're paying that, to me, would be that it's less costly than for them to make the repair.
Well, when it comes to just restoring services, it certainly can be. We see that in the case with the pipeline. The demands were high, but they were within reason. They were losing so much business, and they understand that they're critical infrastructure, that it was in, quote-unquote, their best interest to pay the ransom. And even then, it still took days for them to recover from the incident and get services back up and running and supplying gas. And you'll find that true for the healthcare industry, right? We've got patients on operating tables. We've got, people need to be entered into the ER. All of these things are obviously incredibly critical to keep up and running and to be able to perform those services. And they'll have to balance out the risk of trying to do your recovery on your own versus paying the ransom and, being up and on your way in more of a timely fashion. When we talk about, some other things today, I'm sure we're going to hit on, having a plan. We talk a lot about prevention and detection, but response is becoming more and more critical. And I think that's one of the major things that we're learning is, okay, if it is and when it's going to happen, how do we recover and how do we respond? How do we protect our backups in a different way so that we can keep them from any particular compromised areas in our network? And how are we able to get access and restore services quickly without having to succumb to the demands of paying a ransomware?
Anthony, I don't want to open this up for more vulnerability with our listeners, but there's a big push today for interoperability, telemedicine, and giving patients more access, online access to their records. And we had Rita Bowen on the show talking about interoperability between organizations, and then the higher demand today because of COVID. We had Angela Rose on talking about telemedicine. Seems like that this push is also opening up additional liability points of introit for these organizations to again attack the organization, the healthcare organization, for higher demands. Am I missing something here?
No, Don, I think you're right on. And I'm sure if you listen to those podcasts, you know, Rita and Angela both talked about the tremendous benefits of interoperability, giving the patients access to records, obviously all of the power that telemedicine brings to us as human beings. You know, I know personally I had 4 or 5 sessions throughout COVID with a couple of my primary doctors and some specialists that I just wouldn't have been able to attend otherwise. And the demand for those technologies is obviously increasing. The downside is, like any other technologies, they come with new risk. They create additional attack surfaces, they create new policies, they create new repositories for sensitive information that need to be handled adequately. So the balancing act there is trying not to move too quickly, that you're outpacing security when you're implementing these types of new technologies. If we did come shooting out of the blocks early on when COVID hit, which would be understandable given those circumstances, and I don't know how many people had a pandemic plan specifically called out in their business continuity planning prior to this incident, but I'll tell you, everybody does now. But if you did come a little bit out of the gate to introduce new technology in order to provide new services, new critical services, to give people access to critical infrastructure that typically would have been done inside of a closed-off network, we've had like a year now to have caught up with that and make sure that we've got all of our policies and procedures in place, that we've taken time to do all of the risk assessments, that we have chosen the right partners in order to implement these technologies or provide these solutions. So we always want to balance out that drive for innovation with the risk assessment associated to it and applying the appropriate controls to implement these newer wonderful technologies in as secure a fashion as possible.
Anthony, it seems like to me MRO is in the business of releasing information properly, securely to different organizations. Are there any regulations that govern the recipients of that information and its security once that information is received by an organization such as an insurance company or a law firm acting on behalf of the patient for litigation, could be personal injury, that type thing? Are there any regulations that once it leaves the safeguard of the hospital, that there are additional safeguards on the recipient end?
Don, I think it all really depends on the recipient. Obviously, we can deliver the records to the patient who have the obligations to protect it however they so choose and can really deal with it whatever they choose to. If we're releasing to an insurance company or a government agency, obviously that comes with a much higher set of standards on the obligations that the recipient is under in order to protect that information. And then when it comes to lawyers, it's really about that patient-attorney relationship, and they're obligated to keep that private, but not necessarily under HIPAA like we are as a business associate.
Finally, I'll ask about the new trends. I know you talked about some different companies and some of those trends that technology is advancing to prevent the attacks and successful attacks. But are there any other trends for our audience that you'd like to make them aware of?
Well, again, I think this concept of continuous monitoring, both for vulnerability and for threats, is just going to continue to evolve, and we'll put some references out in our upcoming blog on places where people can go to, find some interesting things that organizations are working on. Most recently with Joe Biden's press conference and the executive order that he signed in, we're seeing a lot of information sharing around threats and these indicators of compromise, these IOCs, and being more collaborative with that information in order to consolidate that knowledge and have it in as many people's hands in order to help us build additional tools. And then obviously the references to moving towards zero trust models is really something that I think we're going to continue to hear more and more about. And when people say things like zero trust or zero trust network, what they really mean is that in a traditional networking environment, you have a set of authentication, and once you've authenticated into an environment that you have access entitlements for, you can just go and freely use those resources on the internal network. So basically everything inside of the network was typically trusted to a certain degree, but everything outside of the perimeter was typically untrusted, so that we've got firewalls and web application firewalls and a whole bunch of tools and technologies and techniques that have protected the outside from, or the inside world from the outside world. And now with a zero trust model, it's basically don't trust anybody, even if they're already on the network. And that's what helps us be able to limit the amount of exposure if a credential gets compromised or if a machine gets compromised. And it really forces us to start looking at security in a very different way. And if you go read the executive order, which we'll also include a link to in the blog, you can see the direction that Joe Biden and the government is trying to take those types of security models.
Seems almost counterintuitive, is that we're opening up legitimately the doors for people to be able to receive and providers to be able to provide better health care. And at the same time, in that effort, we open up the door to issues of the dark web, that the dark web prints out there, so that people can attack that intent. Just seems counterintuitive. We're trying to do one thing and ending up creating a problem on the other end.
Well, you're right. Unfortunately, there's such a dichotomy between access and privacy and security that we just have to continue to put some of our brightest minds towards and figure out the appropriate ways that we can do it. You see the proliferation of all these personal health applications. People are taking things out of these systems and putting them into their own personal health record. People can now go and try and exploit the personal health record instead of the hospital's EMRs and things like that for different purposes. But you're right. There's some tension between interoperability, data access, and what we consider, privacy and security considerations.
Anthony, any references that you can share with our listeners on companies that are very progressive and aggressive in their approach to security that you can put out on our website?
As mentioned, we'll certainly put out the executive order. We'll move out some information on some of the common security frameworks like HITRUST or the NIST. And then we'll call out some of the people who I think are doing a really great job of taking burgeoning technologies like AI and applying that to alerting, detection, and monitoring.
Well, Anthony, I want to thank you for being a guest on our show today. And for more insight on a patient's medical record through the healthcare system, visit our show's page at mrocorp.com. You can also check out our program page on healthcarenowradio.com. Finally, be sure to connect with us on Twitter at MRO Corp. Until we talk again, I'm Don Hardwick, and thanks for listening.